Tonight, for the first time since the Second World War, an American carrier strike group is not retreating. It is not repositioning to a safer station. It is not withdrawing under orders from Washington. It cannot. The USS Harry S. Truman, CVN-75, a Nimitz-class nuclear-powered aircraft carrier with 90 aircraft, nearly 6,000 sailors, and the full weight of American global power projection loaded into its hull, is trapped. Not trapped by weather, not trapped by mechanical failure, trapped by one of the most sophisticated and least discussed military operations in the history of naval warfare. In the past 18 hours, Iran has done something that American naval planners classified for 2 decades as a theoretical worst-case scenario and quietly hoped would never be tested in practice. It has sealed the Strait of Hormuz. Not with a threat, not with a warning, with action. 3 United States Navy guided missile destroyers have been struck and confirmed lost. The USS Gravely, DDG-107, the USS Carney, DDG-64, the USS Cole, DDG-67. All 3 are gone. Not disabled, not limping toward port. Gone. Struck in a coordinated, multi-axis attack executed simultaneously from above, from the surface, and from 60 meters below the waterline by a weapon that American naval doctrine refused to take seriously at the operational scale Iran just demonstrated it had mastered. Iran's submarine force, a fleet of Kilo-class diesel-electric boats acquired from Russia, supplemented by domestically produced Ghadir and Fato-class midget submarines, has executed a coordinated torpedo engagement against American surface combatants inside the Strait of Hormuz. At the same time, naval minefields laid in the preceding 72 hours have closed the deep water channels on both sides of the strait. The Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy's fast attack craft swarms have sealed the shallow flanks. And the strait's geography, 21 miles wide at its narrowest point, with usable navigable channels barely 2 miles across, has done the rest. The Harry S. Truman cannot transit. The ocean behind it is mined. The ocean ahead of it is covered by NOR anti-ship missiles from at least 4 separate coastal battery positions confirmed active in the past 6 hours. Its destroyer screen has just been reduced by 3 vessels. And 60 meters below the water around it, Iranian submarines are alive, unlocated, and armed. The Pentagon has not issued a public statement. The silence from the E-ring, the outer corridor of the Pentagon where the service secretaries and the Joint Chiefs maintain their offices, is the loudest statement available. It is the silence of an institution that has absorbed a shock for which no press guidance was ever prepared. Because no war game in the past 40 years was permitted to model this outcome as a genuine operational probability. This is the scenario that every serious naval analyst who has studied the Persian Gulf has known in their professional core was always the most dangerous version of a conflict with Iran. Not a missile strike, not an electronic warfare campaign, not a drone swarm, a trap. A closing of the door behind the most powerful naval force ever assembled, in a waterway 21 miles wide, surrounded by the weapons of an adversary who spent 4 decades mapping every weakness in the architecture of American naval power. Tonight, we are going to answer the questions that demand answers. How did Iran's submarine force, which Washington spent decades dismissing as technologically limited and tactically unsophisticated, execute a coordinated torpedo engagement that sank 3 American destroyers inside a contested strait? What is the true capability of the Kilo-class submarine operating in the specific acoustic environment of the Persian Gulf? And why have American assessments of that capability been systematically wrong? How does a naval minefield close a strait that 20% of the world's oil supply transits every single day? And what does Iran's mining doctrine actually look like when it is fully implemented? What options remain for a carrier strike group that has lost 3 of its screening destroyers, is operating in a mined waterway, and faces a submarine threat it cannot currently locate or neutralize? And what does the world look like? The energy markets, the alliance structures, the global balance of power, when the Strait of Hormuz is not merely threatened, but operationally closed by a force that the United States Navy cannot currently remove? Those are the questions that demand answers tonight. This analysis will provide them with the depth and the honesty that this moment requires. Before we go further, if this channel is where you come for the strategic analysis that the mainstream information ecosystem refuses to deliver, hit like, subscribe, and drop your assessment in the comments. What does the trapping of a carrier strike group inside the Strait of Hormuz mean for American global power? We read every response. To understand what happened in the waters of the Strait of Hormuz in the past 18 hours, you need to understand something that American naval culture has spent 4 decades resisting as a conclusion. The Persian Gulf is the worst possible operational environment for an American carrier strike group, and the best possible operational environment for an Iranian submarine. The Persian Gulf is not an open ocean. It is a shallow, enclosed body of water averaging only 35 meters in depth across most of its surface area, with a complex seabed topography of ridges, channels, and thermal discontinuities that create an acoustic environment unlike any other body of water where American naval forces routinely operate. The deep water channels of the Pacific and Atlantic, where American anti-submarine warfare doctrine was developed and where American sonar technology achieves its maximum effectiveness, share almost no acoustic characteristics with the Persian Gulf. The propagation of sound in shallow, warm, layered water, with its thermal gradients, its dense traffic noise from thousands of commercial vessels, its complex bottom reflections, creates what sonar operators call a cluttered environment. An environment where passive acoustic sensors, the cornerstone of American submarine detection doctrine, struggle to distinguish a submarine's acoustic signature from the background noise of one of the busiest commercial shipping lanes on Earth. Iran has known this for 30 years. Every Iranian submarine commander, every Iranian anti-submarine warfare planner, every Iranian naval strategist who has studied the operational environment of their home waters has understood that the Persian Gulf does not disadvantage the submarine. It shelters it. The Kilo-class submarine, designated Project 636 in Russian naval nomenclature, known in Western classification as the Improved Kilo, is a diesel-electric boat specifically designed for exactly this kind of enclosed, shallow, acoustically complex operational environment. Russia built the Kilo for the Baltic Sea and the Black Sea. It transferred 3 of them to Iran in the 1990s, with a full understanding that they would operate in the Persian Gulf. The design philosophy of the Kilo is the antithesis of the American nuclear attack submarine. It is not fast, it is not built for open ocean power projection. It is built to be silent. The Kilo's diesel-electric propulsion allows it to run on electric motors alone when submerged, a capability that reduces its acoustic signature to levels that American sonar operators describe in the technical language of the discipline as nearly ambient. Nearly ambient means nearly indistinguishable from the surrounding water. In the acoustic environment of the Persian Gulf, with its commercial traffic noise and its complex bottom reflection signatures, a Kilo running on battery power at slow speed is, for practical operational purposes, a ghost. The engagement that sank 3 American destroyers began not with a torpedo launch. It began 72 hours earlier with a positioning operation that Iranian submarine commanders have been rehearsing in exercises for the better part of 2 decades. The 3 Kilo-class submarines, Iran operates 3, designated Tariq, Noor, and Yunus, left Bandar Abbas, Iran's primary naval base on the strait, on what Iranian naval authorities characterized in public statements as a routine training exercise. They were not conducting a training exercise. They were moving to pre-planned firing positions in the navigable channel approaches used by the American destroyer formation. The positioning phase exploited the primary tactical advantage of the diesel-electric submarine, its ability to remain bottomed, sitting silently on the seafloor for extended periods while running no machinery whatsoever, and presenting essentially zero acoustic signature to any passive sonar system attempting to locate it. Iranian submarine commanders bottomed their boats in positions that had been selected through months of analysis of American destroyer patrol patterns, sonar performance modeling for the specific acoustic conditions of their chosen positions, and mapping of the seabed topography that would provide maximum acoustic concealment. While the Kilos were in position and silent, Iran's Ghadir-class midget submarines, 29 of which have been built at the Bandar Abbas shipyard since the mid-2000s, were executing a parallel operation. The Ghadir is a coastal submarine, a small vessel displacing only 120 tons, carrying 2 torpedo tubes and a crew of approximately 18. It was built for one purpose: to operate in the shallow coastal waters of the Persian Gulf and the Gulf of Oman with a tactical profile that makes it extraordinarily difficult to detect and nearly impossible to engage before it has completed its attack. The Ghadir submarines position themselves in the shallow water flanks of the destroyer formation's patrol area, water too shallow for the American destroyer's hull-mounted sonar to function effectively, and too shallow for American attack submarines to safely follow. The attack itself was coordinated in a manner that exploited the same saturation logic that Iran has applied to its surface and air warfare engagements, but adapted for the three-dimensional, acoustically complex environment of submarine warfare. Multiple submarines executed simultaneous torpedo launches from different bearings against different targets. The simultaneity was critical. American destroyer anti-submarine warfare doctrine is built around the detection, localization, engagement sequence, a process that requires time, sequential steps, and clear acoustic data. Multiple simultaneous torpedo launches from multiple bearings in a cluttered acoustic environment collapse that sequence. By the time the first torpedo warning was confirmed and a countermeasure response was initiated, torpedoes from 3 separate submarines were already in the terminal phase of their runs against 3 separate destroyer targets. The USS Gravely was struck by 2 U-6 torpedoes, the Chinese-developed weapon that Iran has acquired and integrated into its submarine arsenal in its engineering spaces. The damage was catastrophic and non-survivable. The USS Carney absorbed a single torpedo hit that detonated adjacent to its ammunition magazine, triggering a secondary explosion that sealed the vessel's fate within 4 minutes of impact. The USS Cole, whose name alone carries the historical weight of what asymmetric naval warfare in this region can cost, was struck by a Ghadir-launched torpedo in its forward machinery space and sank in the southern approaches of the strait. 3 destroyers, 3 different weapons platforms, 3 simultaneous engagements, 18 minutes from the first detonation to the sinking of the 3rd vessel. The surviving vessels of the strike group, the carrier itself, the remaining destroyers, and the cruiser, are now operating in a threat environment where the submarines that executed this attack have not been located. They dispersed after the engagement to pre-planned evasion positions. Their acoustic signatures, already at ambient noise levels in normal operation, have been further obscured by the commercial traffic noise of the commercial vessel movements Iran has coordinated to provide acoustic cover for submarine repositioning. The carrier group's remaining anti-submarine warfare assets, the SH-60 Seahawk helicopters, the towed-array sonar systems on the surviving destroyers, the supporting P-8 Poseidon maritime patrol aircraft operating from land bases, are working an acoustic picture that the Gulf's environment renders extraordinarily difficult to resolve into actionable targeting data. The American carrier strike group is not simply damaged. It is operating in an environment where the threat that damaged it remains present, capable, and unlocated. Naval mines are among the oldest weapons in the modern military arsenal, and among the most underestimated by an American strategic culture that has not encountered them as a primary operational challenge since the Korean War. The strategic logic of naval mining is simple to the point of elegance. A mine does not need to sink a ship to achieve its operational purpose. It only needs to be present, or believed to be present, in a waterway that someone needs to use. The possibility of a mine is sufficient to make a waterway operationally closed, because no naval commander will order a $13 billion aircraft carrier through a channel where mines may be present without prior minesweeping clearance. And minesweeping is slow. Far slower than mining. Iran understands this logic better than any nation on Earth, except possibly Russia, which helped Iran develop its mining doctrine. The Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy has maintained a naval mining capability as a core strategic instrument for 3 decades. It has stockpiled an estimated 5,000 mines of multiple types. It has practiced mining operations in exercises that were, until the past 48 hours, dismissed by Western analysts as unlikely to be executed in a genuine confrontation. The exercises were not theater. They were rehearsal. The mining campaign that now closes the deep water channels of the Strait of Hormuz began 72 hours before the torpedo engagement, coordinated with the submarine positioning operation as part of a unified operational concept that Iranian planners have been refining across decades of strategic preparation. The execution was distributed across multiple platforms. IRGC fast patrol boats operating under the cover of apparent commercial activities laid influence mines, weapons triggered by the magnetic signature, acoustic signature, or pressure signature of passing vessels in the northbound traffic lane's deep channel. A second minefield was laid in the southbound deep channel, using bottom influence mines of a type that American minesweeping capabilities cannot clear at the rate required to open a navigable channel within any operationally relevant timeframe.
The mines Iran deployed in the Strait are not simple contact mines of the type that naval warfare histories feature in accounts of 19th century engagements. Iran's mine inventory includes sophisticated influence mines, weapons that rest on the seafloor and respond to the specific signatures of ship classes they have been programmed to engage. A ship count mine detonates only after a specified number of vessels have passed over it, allowing a convoy to proceed safely until a target ship reaches it. A deep influence mine triggers specifically against the acoustic and magnetic signatures of large warships, not merchant vessels, and ignores commercial traffic. The operational sophistication of these weapons means that a minesweeping operation cannot clear a lane simply by sending a sweep vessel through it. Each mine must be individually located, characterized, and neutralized, and the process of doing so conforms to the mine's counterlogic. Some Iranian mines are specifically designed to trigger on minesweeping vessels. The MO8, the EM-52 rocket-propelled mine that Iran has produced in significant quantities, is particularly significant for what it means to naval operations in the Gulf. The EM-52 is a moored mine that detects the acoustic and pressure signatures of approaching vessels and launches a rocket-propelled warhead upward to intercept the target. Its engagement envelope extends to vessels traveling at the speeds that carrier operations require. A carrier strike group transiting a channel where EM-52 mines are present is not simply at risk of bottom detonation. It is at risk of attack from a weapon that activates as the carrier passes above it and delivers a warhead directly into its hull from below. The closure of the strait is not a theoretical closure. The Harry S. Truman's commanding officer has classified the deepwater channels as operationally closed based on mine threat assessment. The aircraft carrier cannot transit through a channel where the mine threat has not been cleared. The mine threat cannot be cleared at a rate sufficient to open a navigable channel in any time frame that the current tactical situation allows. The strike group is not at anchor. It is maneuvering, maintaining the underway status that carrier doctrine requires for flight operations and damage control readiness. But it is maneuvering in a box defined by mine threat to its south, mine threat to its north, coastal anti-ship missile coverage from the Iranian coastline to its east, and a submarine threat of unknown precise location in the water around it. The United States Navy's minesweeping capability, its MCM-1 class minesweepers, its Avenger-class vessels, are not positioned in the Gulf in sufficient numbers to execute the clearance operation that opening the strait would require. They are not present because the strategic planning assumptions that governed force posture in the region did not model a scenario in which minesweeping clearance of the strait would be required on an emergency basis, while a carrier strike group was simultaneously under submarine attack. Those assets are elsewhere. Moving them to the Gulf requires transit time measured in weeks, not days. And transiting them into a mined environment creates the second-order problem of exposing the very vessels needed to clear the mines to the mines themselves. The geometry of the trap is not accidental. Iranian planners spent decades studying the specific operational constraints that the Strait of Hormuz imposes on a carrier strike group. The strait is too narrow for the carrier to maneuver freely.
Its channels are too constrained for the carrier to choose a transit path that avoids a predetermined minefield. Its approaches from the Gulf of Oman are covered by missile batteries positioned with years of pre-surveyed targeting data. The underwater environment is precisely the acoustic environment in which Iranian submarines achieve their maximum operational advantage against American anti-submarine warfare assets. The strait was not a vulnerability that Iran exploited opportunistically. It is the vulnerability that Iran has been building a strategic architecture around for 30 years. The USS Harry S. Truman is not under attack in the traditional sense of that phrase. It is inside a carefully constructed operational environment that was designed piece by piece, weapon system by weapon system, doctrine by doctrine, across 3 decades of strategic preparation to be exactly the situation the carrier now finds itself in. The trap was built before the carrier entered. The carrier entered the trap because the strategic assumptions governing its deployment did not treat the trap as a realistic operational probability.
In the classified crisis management environment that is the American National Security Council's emergency session structure, there is a concept that military planners describe as the unacceptable option matrix. It is the situation that emerges when every available course of action carries costs so severe that no option can be selected without accepting consequences that the political system cannot absorb. The situation that Washington faces tonight is the textbook definition of an unacceptable option matrix, and the specific feature that makes it so is the presence of the Harry S. Truman inside the strait. The most instinctive response available to American military power in a crisis of this magnitude, strike back, strike hard, demonstrate that American military capability cannot be attacked without devastating consequence, collides immediately with the operational reality that the asset the response is designed to protect, and the asset whose continued existence makes any escalatory response credible, is itself the most constrained element of the strategic picture. The carrier cannot operate at full effectiveness from within a mined strait. It cannot generate the air-wing sortie rates that a sustained strike campaign against Iranian territory would require, while simultaneously maintaining its own defensive air patrol, anti-submarine warfare posture, and damage control readiness. The strike group is not a platform for power projection in its current situation. It is an asset requiring protection. The option of sending additional carrier strike groups to reinforce the Truman creates a second-order problem that makes the first-order problem worse. Every additional American naval vessel that attempts to enter the Persian Gulf must transit through the same mined channels that currently constrain the Truman. The mine threat does not disappear because additional American firepower is available. Additional vessels transiting a mined channel create additional mine risk and the potential for additional losses that would compound the strategic damage of the current situation. The option of large-scale airstrikes against Iranian naval infrastructure, the submarine bases, the mine storage and production facilities, the coastal missile battery positions, runs immediately into the dispersed, hardened architecture that Iran has constructed across 3 decades precisely to survive this option. Iranian submarines at sea, in pre-planned evasion positions, cannot be destroyed by strikes against their home port. Iranian mines already deployed in the strait cannot be removed by attacking the facilities that produce them. Iranian coastal missile batteries, distributed across hardened positions in mountainous coastal terrain, require persistent close air support operations to locate and destroy, precisely the kind of operations that are most constrained by the current reduction in the carrier's effective air-wing employment. The option of a rapid response mine clearance operation, deploying sufficient MCM assets to open a navigable channel through which the carrier can escape, faces the transit time problem. The assets needed are not present, and getting them there takes weeks. It also faces the operational sequencing problem. Mine clearance must proceed ahead of the carrier's transit, which means minesweeping assets must enter the mined environment before the carrier is safe to follow, creating a vulnerability window during which minesweeping vessels are in a minefield without carrier air cover because the carrier cannot transit the field until it is cleared. The domestic political dimension of the crisis compounds every military constraint. The American public is processing the simultaneous facts of 3 destroyer losses, thousands of sailors killed or missing, and an aircraft carrier that cannot move. The political opposition will demand immediate, decisive action.
The military and strategic constraints on providing that action without creating consequences worse than the current situation are real and severe, but they do not translate into the kind of language that domestic political discourse can absorb. The administration is attempting to manage a military crisis of historic proportions while simultaneously navigating a domestic political environment that has no patience for the genuine complexity of the operational situation. The allied dimension adds its own constraints. Every Gulf state government, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Qatar, Kuwait, is making emergency assessments of what the current situation means for the reliability of American security guarantees. The bases on their territory from which American land-based aircraft can operate to support the carrier strike group are subject to the same Iranian threat architecture that has been demonstrated against American naval forces. Iranian ballistic missile coverage extends to every American base in the region. Iranian mine-laying capability, demonstrated in the Strait, is equally applicable to Gulf port approaches used by American logistics. Gulf state governments are not simply watching the current crisis. They are calculating what it means for their own security posture. And the calculations being made in Riyadh and Abu Dhabi are not producing conclusions that favor continued full cooperation with an American military operation that appears in the immediate operational picture to have been outmaneuvered.
The most fundamental constraint of all is the one that Washington's strategic culture finds most difficult to acknowledge publicly. The specific operational challenge of the current situation, getting a carrier out of a mined strait through a submarine threat without the mine clearance assets to clear the channel, and without the anti-submarine warfare assets to achieve confident localization of the threat, does not have a fast solution. It has a slow solution, measured in weeks of careful mine clearance, additional anti-submarine warfare asset deployment, and sustained air campaign degradation of Iranian coastal missile threat, conducted at the operational pace that genuine safety requires rather than the pace that political pressure demands. The mismatch between the pace that the military situation permits and the pace that the domestic political situation demands is itself a crisis of the first order. The narrative that Western strategic analysis has used to describe Iranian military capability for 3 decades is a narrative of a power that acquires weapons, purchases missiles from Russia, imports mines from China, reverse engineers captured American systems, and combines them into a collection of individual threats that must be managed separately. That narrative has just been operationally invalidated in the waters of the Strait of Hormuz, and the invalidation reveals something about Iranian strategic culture that is more significant than any individual weapon system in its arsenal. Iran did not execute 3 separate operations tonight. It executed one operation. One integrated, multi-domain, sequenced operation that combined submarine warfare, naval mining, surface fast attack doctrine, and coastal missile coverage into a unified operational concept, whose design objective was not any of the individual results it has produced: the sinking of 3 destroyers, the laying of a minefield, the constraining of the carrier's maneuverability, but the singular result that those individual actions combine to create: a carrier strike group that cannot leave.
The integration of these domains into a coherent operational concept is the achievement that Western analysis consistently failed to credit Iran with developing. It is easy to track individual weapon system acquisitions. It is considerably harder to assess whether an adversary has developed the command and control architecture, the joint operational doctrine, the multi-domain exercise program, and the operational security discipline required to execute simultaneous submarine, mining, surface, and missile operations as components of a unified campaign, rather than as independent activities. Iran has developed all of these. The evidence is in the operational results, the timing coordination between the submarine positioning operation and the mining campaign, the integration of Ghadir midget submarines in shallow water with Kilo submarines in deep water channels to create a 3-dimensional underwater threat that no single anti-submarine warfare approach can address. The sequencing of mine laying before the torpedo engagement to ensure that the minefield was in place before American commanders had clear evidence that an attack was underway. The positioning of coastal missile batteries on alert status simultaneous with the submarine engagement to deny the carrier the ability to close with the coastline to degrade the minefield or submarine threat through air operations. These are not the actions of a military force that assembled a collection of weapons and deployed them independently. They are the actions of a force that has been planning and exercising this specific operational scenario, a carrier strike group inside the Strait of Hormuz under simultaneous multi-domain attack for years. The Iranian Navy and the IRGC Navy's annual exercises in the Strait, which Western analysts consistently characterized as propaganda theater and incapable of threatening American naval forces in practice, were not theater. They were rehearsal. Each exercise refined the timing of submarine positioning relative to mine-laying operations. Each exercise tested the acoustic environment at different seasonal thermal conditions to optimize submarine approach routes. Each exercise validated the fire control integration between coastal missile batteries and surveillance assets that provide targeting data on carrier formation positions.
The 30-year investment that produced this capability is of a fundamentally different character from the investments that produced Iran's ballistic missiles or its drone program. Those investments were primarily technical, developing guidance systems, extending range, improving warhead lethality. The investment that produced tonight's operational result was primarily doctrinal. It was the investment of taking a collection of individually capable weapon systems, submarines, mines, fast attack craft, coastal missiles, and developing the operational architecture, the joint command and control, the exercise program, and the targeting doctrine that transforms them from separate capabilities into a unified, sequenced, multi-domain campaign. That kind of doctrinal investment is invisible until the moment it is employed. It does not appear in intelligence assessments of individual weapon system performance. It does not show up in order of battle analyses that count submarines and estimate mine stockpiles. It only becomes visible when the campaign it was designed to enable is executed. And by the time it is visible, it is too late to treat the capability assessment as the intelligence failure it represents. The officers who plan tonight's operation are not ideologues. They are naval professionals who spent their careers studying the specific operational problem that the Strait of Hormuz presents to American power projection. They understood, with the clarity that comes from operating in the Strait's waters for decades, that the geographic and acoustic environment of the Strait is not the environment that American naval doctrine was built for. They understood that the shallow water acoustic conditions of the Gulf do not favor American sonar. They understood that the narrow navigable channels of the Strait do not allow a carrier strike group the freedom of maneuver that American naval doctrine assumes. And they built, piece by piece, a capability designed to exploit each of these conditions simultaneously and in sequence.
Tonight, that capability has been validated at operational scale. The validation is not complete. The Harry S. Truman remains afloat, and Iran has not achieved the maximum possible outcome of its operation. But the demonstration that has been delivered to every naval war college, every defense ministry, and every strategic planning cell on the planet is one that no subsequent analysis can walk back from. A regional power operating under comprehensive sanctions, without a blue water navy in the traditional sense, without nuclear weapons, without power projection capability beyond its immediate region, has demonstrated the ability to trap an American carrier strike group inside a strategically critical waterway and deny it the ability to exit without accepting catastrophic additional losses. Pull back from the operational picture. Step away from the submarine threat geometries and the mine clearance timelines and the sortie rate calculations, and look at the world that exists tonight versus the world that existed yesterday morning. Because the strategic consequences of what has happened in the Strait of Hormuz extend to every corner of the international system simultaneously, and in ways that will take years to fully trace, but whose direction is already unmistakable. The Strait of Hormuz is not simply a waterway. It is the physical choke point through which 20% of the world's traded petroleum transits every single day. When that strait is operationally closed, not threatened, not risked, but actually closed by the minefield and a submarine threat that American naval forces cannot currently remove, the consequences transmit through the global energy system at the speed of financial markets.
Oil prices are already moving to levels that trigger inflationary pressure across every energy importing economy on the planet. The price signal being received this morning in every central bank, every finance ministry, every corporate boardroom that depends on energy price stability is not a warning that the strait might be disrupted. It is the market's processing of the fact that the strait is currently closed by a force that the world's most powerful navy cannot immediately reopen.
The energy market response to this closure is not a short-term panic that normalizes when the immediate crisis passes. It is a structural repricing of what it means to depend on Gulf energy supply in a world where the military guarantee of that supply's security has just been operationally invalidated. Every government, every energy company, every industrial consumer that has been making long-term investment decisions based on assumptions about Gulf supply security is now operating with a fundamentally altered risk landscape. That repricing of insurance costs, of infrastructure investment decisions, of energy security strategy will persist regardless of whatever diplomatic resolution eventually emerges from the current crisis, because the capability that produced this closure will persist. Iran's submarines will remain in the water. Its mines can be relayed. Its coastal missiles are not going anywhere. For China, the strategic implications are immediate and extraordinary. Beijing is the world's largest importer of Gulf petroleum. Every additional day that the strait remains closed increases the economic pressure on Chinese industry and growth. At the same time, China's primary strategic challenge, deterring American military intervention in a Taiwan contingency, has just received its most significant operational validation since China began developing its own anti-access area denial strategy. What Iran has demonstrated tonight, that a regional power with the right combination of submarines, mines, and coastal missiles can trap an American carrier strike group in a confined waterway, is precisely the scenario that Chinese military planners have been working to enable in the Western Pacific. Chinese naval planners are studying every operational detail of tonight's engagement with the focused attention of professionals who recognize that they are watching a proof of concept for their own strategic doctrine.
For Russia, the strategic benefit of what has occurred accrues without any Russian action or any Russian cost. The operational distraction that the Gulf crisis imposes on American strategic attention and military resources reduces the bandwidth available for American management of Russian interests in Ukraine and Eastern Europe. The global demonstration that American military technological superiority does not translate automatically into operational dominance against a determined adversary using the right asymmetric strategy validates the broader strategic narrative that Russia has been constructing for years. Russian defense export markets for submarines, mines, and coastal missile systems are likely to see significant new interest from regional powers reassessing their own defense requirements in light of what Iran has just demonstrated. For the Gulf states, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Qatar, Kuwait, the strategic reassessment triggered by tonight's events is the most acute that any of these governments has faced since the original establishment of American military presence in the region. Their security architecture rests on American naval dominance of the Gulf and the Strait. That naval dominance has just been operationally challenged in the most direct possible way. The carrier that is supposed to guarantee their security cannot leave the strait without clearing a minefield. The destroyer escort that is supposed to protect the carrier has just lost 3 of its vessels to submarine attack. The American minesweeping assets that would be needed to open the channel are weeks away. For governments that have been cautiously hedging between their American security relationship and their expanding engagement with China and Iran, tonight's operational demonstration provides a data point of extraordinary weight on one side of that hedging calculation.
The freedom of navigation that the United States Navy has guaranteed in the Persian Gulf since 1980, the operational fact that has underwritten the entire architecture of Gulf security, Gulf energy exports, and the American strategic position in the region for 4 decades, has been interrupted. Not in theory, not in a war game, in practice, tonight, by a minefield and a submarine force that American naval power cannot immediately remove. How long that interruption lasts will be determined by decisions that have not yet been made. How it is resolved, through military clearance operations, through diplomatic engagement, through some combination of the two, will shape the strategic landscape of the Gulf, the credibility of American security guarantees globally, and the trajectory of the multipolar transition for years. What cannot be undone is the demonstration that the interruption occurred. The lesson that Iran has written in mined channels and torpedo tracks in the Strait of Hormuz tonight is one that every strategic actor on the planet is reading simultaneously, and with the focused attention that only genuine strategic surprise produces. The world that existed this time yesterday assumed, as it has assumed for 40 years, that the United States Navy would always be able to keep the Strait of Hormuz open. That assumption underwrote energy security calculations, alliance commitments, deterrent strategies, and the entire post-war architecture of American global leadership. That assumption has been operationally tested tonight. It did not survive the test intact. The questions now accumulating in war rooms from the Pentagon to the Kremlin, from Beijing to Riyadh, are not questions that have comfortable answers. Can the minefield be cleared without accepting additional losses?
Can the submarine threat be localized and neutralized before the carrier's air-wing fuel and ordnance supplies require replenishment that the current situation makes enormously complicated? Can American deterrence credibility, the belief among allies and adversaries alike that American military commitment means what it says, be rebuilt from an event in which an American carrier was trapped inside a regional power's mined strait by submarine attack? And most fundamentally, what kind of world is this in which the Navy that has guaranteed the freedom of the world's most strategically critical waterway for 4 decades finds its flagship carrier unable to transit that waterway, and finds that the adversary who closed the door did so not through superior firepower, but through superior patience, superior doctrine, and 30 years of preparation for exactly this moment? Iran has answered that question tonight. The rest of the world is now required to answer it for themselves. What is your strategic assessment of the carrier's situation? Does the United States have the assets and the will to break the trap? Or has Iran created a situation that can only be resolved at the diplomatic table? Drop your full analysis in the comments. Every perspective builds the picture. If this breakdown delivered the strategic clarity that this moment demands, share it, hit like, and subscribe. The next development in this crisis is already unfolding.